So, welcome to this week's Optimum Health Clinic Facebook Live. And firstly, my apologies. I think I've missed two Facebook Lives in a row. And I think it's the first time that's happened actually since I started doing these Facebook Lives 2.25 years ago. There is a very, very good reason why. And this is a bit of a cliffhanger, but that reason why is going to be revealed in the OHC Live 100, which is obviously going to be in a few weeks' time. I've been working on for the last 4 months or so what's probably the biggest independent kind of standalone project that we've done in the history of the Optimum Health Clinic. So it's been consuming an enormous amount of time. So yeah, that will be revealed on OHC Live 100. That's the plan. So this week, what I thought I would do is the part 2 of the series that I started doing a few Facebook Lives ago around this idea of kind of Ask Me Anything, where you guys have been posting questions. There's been a kind of range of different questions. And I think so far I've pretty much just been going, I just took the questions in order they came. And that was my plan for the session today. So probably we'll get through 2 or 3 questions. There's a load more that are here. So I think this will just be a kind of bit of an ongoing theme that we'll kind of come back to these at various points. So the next question in the series was from Lisa. And the question was, I wonder how the achiever type and the inner critic can be separated from each other. To me, they very much interfere, and how to then handle them with different techniques. So I think I've covered the achiever type in a Facebook Live, and I'm sure I would have talked about the inner critic. So for those of you which aren't aware of those terms, that would be good places to go to find out more. But the achiever type really is that part of us which kind of defines our value as a human being. Like our self-worth gets defined by what we do and what we achieve. So we're often kind of striving to accomplish things in the world so we can then feel a sense of being good enough and being lovable. The inner critic is that voice which is always judging and assessing our worth as a human being. So in a sense, these are two sides of the same coin in a sense. It's the same dynamic, but it also plays out in some kind of different ways. So with the achiever pattern, in a sense, it's that kind of doingness energy. It's that sense of pushing ourselves, or feeling like we need to achieve certain outcomes, and in a sense, the achievement of the outcome being more important than how we feel, what our resources are, and anything else that might be going on. The inner critic is the kind of judgment, it's the assessment, it's the kind of valuing of us in a kind of ongoing commentary kind of way. So you know when the achiever is what's going on, because there's this kind of constant forward momentum. There's this constant sense of needing to do and needing to push ourselves. Now, the inner critic might be partly fueling that and maybe kind of pushing that, but there's a kind of separate energy, which is this kind of doingness that's there. You know when the inner critic is at work, because we have this sense of feeling less, like we feel smaller. We often will feel shame. So shame is an emotion which is generally a relatively unhelpful emotion. I think there's a place for having appropriate morals and reflection, and sometimes disappointment in ourselves. But shame is generally a judgment, and we can really mess something up without needing to have lots of shame about it. So if we feel shame, or we feel judged, or we feel that we're kind of like we're being attacked and we're kind of squashing ourselves, that tends to be the inner critic. So they're slightly different structures in a sense. You've got the kind of doingness and the pushingness of the achiever, and you've got the judgment and the criticism and the attack of the inner critic. Of course, the two are massively interrelated, because it's often the inner critic that's pushed, that's certainly egging on the achiever, and the inner critic has comments on the success of the achiever, of our achievements and what we're doing. So we do tend to use different strategies to work with these. So often for both of them, a very helpful starting point is awareness. So if you can see it, you don't have to be it. The more that we can identify and recognize these patterns, sometimes the awareness alone will be enough to break the pattern. With the achiever, if you're familiar with some of the optimal health clinic strategies, often we will use the stop process. We might use EFT as a way of understanding and resolving some of the emotional kind of aspects that are kind of driving that, some of the history around it. With the inner critic, there's a series of responses that we will tend to use which are more about defending ourselves. So we don't want to get caught in content because that tends to just feed it. So if our inner critic says you're rubbish and we go, no, I'm not, and it says, yes, you are, and that doesn't tend to help. Sometimes just telling it to literally F off or I don't care what you think, like a kind of defense against it. We use those responses specifically with the inner critic because it's a structure that's talking to us in our mind that we are defending against. Where we don't want to be using those more kind of F off, I don't care what you think kind of things is towards ourselves, because then we're just layering in and kind of attacking ourselves. There's quite a lot of subtlety and nuance in this, and each of these things has its own kind of quite in-depth teaching. But hopefully that at least answers Lisa's question in terms of separating them and how to use different strategies to work with them. The next question is from Mo, and it's perhaps how to manage resentment and anger feelings about having chronic fatigue syndrome, ME, as it can stop so much of your life that's enjoyable and can lose so much, i.e. working, socializing, etc. So how to try and move through that. So this light's kind of weird. I'm not sure if I can. When I set up the camera, I wasn't getting flooded by light from the window at the side. It is a very common thing, and I would say quite healthy and appropriate thing at times to feel resentment, pissed off, angry at the experience of chronic fatigue or ME that one's having. And your whole life is being kind of impacted and you can't do the things that you love to do with the people that you love to do those things with. Of course, there's going to be a certain amount of emotion that comes in. Now, sometimes that emotion comes up massively at the start and then it kind of gradually kind of dissipates. For some people, they tend to go into more of a kind of almost numbed response and you don't really notice much emotional effect. And actually, ironically, it's only when we start to see signs of improvement that it's almost like it's safe enough to relax that we actually start to feel the feelings. And so sometimes on the recovery path, people will kind of come in and say, I'm kind of confused because I'm feeling so much better than I was before. And yet I'm feeling so much more frustrated and angry and resentful and pissed off. And what I would say in response to that is that that's a good sign. It's a sign that we're actually starting to feel emotions again, like we've come out of the kind of wired maladaptive stress response. Things have started to settle enough, we're actually starting to feel feelings, and that's good. And it's almost like we feel safe enough at that point to feel some of these emotions. I would strongly encourage feeling it and accepting it and just being with it. We can sometimes think too much that we need to get rid of emotions, to fix emotions, that we shouldn't feel kind of negative emotions, we should only feel positive emotions. I think all emotions have gifts and opportunity to them. And used in the right way, frustration and resentment is also a pathway to feeling our personal power. Often people that don't feel anger, people will sometimes say, and this comes up quite a bit as part of the conscious transformation program that I run, is people will say, well, I just don't get angry like it's a good thing. You can't not have anger, but you can not feel your anger. But if you don't feel your anger, it's still there and it's still having an impact. And so it's a positive thing to be feeling it, but we don't want to get caught in acting it out. I'm not encouraging kind of vomiting anger out at other people and taking it out and just causing more mess to deal with. But feeling the emotional quality of anger, which is often aliveness, it's kind of strength, it's power. And that digested and processed in the right way is actually a pathway to feeling more personal power. People, the point I didn't quite finish making, is people that don't feel that anger often also don't have access to their strength, to their no, to their personal power, because you can't selectively feel emotions. So if we shut off our sadness, we shut off our ability to fully feel love. If we shut off our anger, we shut off our capacity to feel personal power and strength, for example. So we might think that feeling resentment and anger, I shouldn't be feeling that, that's wrong. I would say the opposite. I would encourage you to feel it, not get stuck in it, not kind of wallow in it and kind of get lost in it, but feel the energetic quality of it. And often with emotions, the more fully we feel them, actually the more quickly they process and we move through them anyway. And to make the kind of changes that often we need to make on the recovery path takes a lot of discipline, takes a lot of personal power, takes a lot of determination. Anger can be an access point to some of those qualities that we need. It can take therapeutic support. It can take working with a practitioner sometimes to work through this kind of material. It can be quite sensitive and quite tricky. But yeah, ultimately, your anger is a gift and an opportunity. Don't act it out. Don't throw it at people. Don't wallow in it and get stuck in it. But the actual energetic quality of it has a lot of positive resources as part of it. I have no idea how long I've been going for, but let's do one more question. So Justine was asking, be good to hear something around healing early life trauma, but not with EFT, as that just never worked for me. So EFT can be a great way of working with trauma and unprocessed emotions. Like everything, it doesn't work for everyone. So if you're someone that has used EFT and you don't feel it's been effective, you're not the only one. Firstly, I would say that we very much recognize a trauma subtype. When we talk about the subtypes of the helper, achiever, anxiety, we actually categorize a trauma subtype as part of that. So there's lots of different kinds of trauma, and trauma is its own area that I don't know if I have touched on actually much on Facebook Live, but I'm happy to do some sessions around. But it can have all kinds of impacts in terms of our maladaptive stress response. Part of the reason why we can be in maladaptive stress response is there's unprocessed trauma in the body. So we're going into the triggered nervous system as a way to not feel the feelings in the body. Also, holding on to trauma takes a lot of energy to do that. So working with trauma is a process. It's one of those things, there's lots of things psychologically one can do quite skillfully working by themselves. Trauma is quite a difficult one to work with without a skilled practitioner. And there's a few reasons for that. Partly the kind of emotional holding, like the sense of being there with somebody else, which gives us that stability and that solidity, is kind of what allows us to access some of those more difficult feelings and emotions. Also, if we go into trauma, sometimes we need someone just to kind of help us ground ourselves and kind of come back into the now if we're getting sucked into some of the difficult past memories. So working with a practitioner is important. Going slowly is important. I always get very nervous when I hear about people saying they're going to do workshops or going to see practitioners that are promising they're going to resolve all of their childhood trauma in short periods of time. Not that I think it's great if it is effective, but normally it's a series of pieces of work. If you've got single events, like a single thing that happens, that kind of trauma is easier to work with often. But if you've got series of traumas, or you've got what we call developmental trauma, where it wasn't a single event, but you didn't quite get the emotional holding and things that you needed when you were growing up, then that often needs some different touch points and different ways of working with. Some things that other ways of working with trauma, I'm just going to make very short comments on these, but EMDR, eye movement desensitization and repatterning can be quite an effective way of working with trauma. There are elements of that in EFT, but sometimes I've observed that the EMDR model alone actually can be more effective. Jess, our Director of Psychology at Optimal Health Clinic, is trained in and uses EMDR. Somatic experiencing is something that's become more popular recently through the work of Peter Levine. It's a very good book called Waking the Tiger. So there's some different theories and ways of working with trauma. And EFT is a tool, but there are a number of other tools, and different tools are appropriate, I think, for different people at different times in different ways. That's quite a short answer to a much, much bigger topic, but hopefully that's just some helpful thoughts for Justine. So thank you for watching. I hope that's been useful. I've got a bit of a goal to be on track over the coming few weeks, so I can hit 100 of the Facebook Lives to make this announcement next month. So hopefully I won't miss any more weeks between now and then. But hopefully you've enjoyed that. Please do share your thoughts and comments with each other underneath, and I will talk with you next week. Bye-bye for now.